Good morning, everyone. It is 10:30, and thank you for joining us for our 6th of our webinar series and our first of our June series. This month, we will focus on a different core mission of the St. Johns River Water Management District each week. This week, we are pleased to have our Executive Director, Dr. Ann Shortell, being our guest presenter today. Dr. Shortell has more than 25 years of professional experience in lake, riverine, and reservoir management for both water quality and water quantity. And her experience also includes surface water and wetlands restoration, surface water modeling, permitting, and environmental assessments. I'm going to give a little bit of a background and remind everybody that you are going to be on mute throughout the entire presentation. However, I do hope that you will enter questions as they come to you, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. If we do not get to all of your questions during the webinar today, then we will email you directly with answers to those questions. With that, I hope that you all enjoy today's webinar, where you get to learn a little bit more about the water management's mission of water supply. So we are one of the 5 water management districts in the state of Florida, and it is our mission to ensure that we have enough water for us and our natural systems at the St. Johns River Water Management District. And so in order to do that, we have 4 core missions that everything we do applies to it. And those 4 core missions are water supply, flood protection, water quality, and natural systems. And throughout June, you'll have the opportunity to take a deeper dive into each one of these core missions. If you're interested in signing up for future webinars, you can check those out on our website. This webinar, along with all of our others, are available on our website as well. So I hope you'll join us for those. This week, we will be discussing water supply, that water that we use in our homes and our businesses, that water that for the most part in our district comes from the Floridan Aquifer. The Floridan Aquifer is a tremendous resource beneath our feet. It is the largest aquifer in the southeast. It covers all of Florida and extends up into southern Georgia, South Carolina, a little bit into Alabama. And it supplies the majority of the water for North and Central Florida. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shortell. And again, Dr. Shortell, thank you so much for helping us with this great topic.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate everybody joining us today. This is a timely topic on people's minds, whether it's raining or not raining. So let's take that deeper dive that Jennifer mentioned. This is just a simple pie chart of the annual water use in St. Johns River Water Management District from 2018. And the total is just under 1 billion gallons per day. The largest slice of the pie by far is public supply. That's the big blue part there. But if you think about the one next to it, the little kind of rusty red one is the domestic self-supply. So that's all folks that are not supplied by a utility, but maybe have it might be a rural homestead with a backyard well, and then all of the other water uses. So public supply, the utilities, that's the largest share, more than half. The next largest piece of the pie is agriculture for irrigation, and that's the green pie chart there. So when we talk about water use and water supply needs, we're not just talking about the water that comes into our own homes. So at the beginning of the day and maybe at the end of the day, water management districts are all also regulatory agencies, and one of those charges for us is consumptive use permitting, the consumptive use of water. And that's not just consumption, again, at our own tap in our kitchen. This is all of the water uses that you saw back on that pie chart. And if it's a tiny little well in the backyard, we we know that that well is going in and it doesn't get a big permit. The big permits are reserved for larger water uses, utilities, entire a large agricultural facility, cooling water, those sorts of things. So that's one of the tools in our toolbox for ensuring that water supply is taken care of. I have no idea what I'm doing that's making this ring, but hello. And when we're looking at permitting water use, we're looking at a three-pronged approach. Is it reasonable and beneficial use? Is it not, we have to make sure it's not going to interfere with existing legal users who have permits nearby, and that it's in the public interest. It's complicated though. This is a graphic of the percentiles of monthly water levels in our district on average from 1980 all the way through today. And when you see those really, really low parts of this graph, we weren't getting a lot of rainfall. The recharge to the upper Floridan is where that, when those big gully washers come and water gets back into the aquifer, and then you see those numbers climbing back up. So some of the recent higher numbers back in 2017 and 18, that is reflective of very wet season and Hurricane Irma in our district. But you can see some of the drought levels also. So that is a pretty big swing over time, water going up and down. One of the things to remember about water and water supply in Florida is we have a lot of water. I think that's why it's hard for some people to even imagine that we have to manage this actively. We have a lot of water. We're not arid. We're not Arizona, for example, but we tend to get our water in big, inconvenient gulps. So another tool in our toolbox, and a very important one, is water supply planning. All the water management districts do this. Many of our water supply plans now, and we have 3 regions in our district, really are cross-boundary with partners. Like in North Florida, we're partnering with the Suwannee District and with DEP. Central Florida, it includes St. John's, South Florida and Southwest and DEP, and all of the stakeholders. That's because back in the day, the water management districts were built on the basis of surface water basins. But you heard Jennifer tell us that the majority of the water is really for consumptive use is coming out of the upper Floridan. It's groundwater, and they don't have the same boundaries. So there's a lot of additional cooperation now on a water supply plan, and these are usually put in place on a 20-year planning horizon. So we're predicting into 20 years ahead, how many people will there be? How much water will we need? And applying the constraints of the natural systems, because they need water too. And it's an active, every day. We have an entire bureau and beyond that work on this literally every single day. So I did mention just briefly that the natural systems need water as well. This could be an outstanding Florida spring. It might be a river. It might be a lake. It's all of the water that is in the environment. And when it gets really, really dry, a wetland, for example, may be very parched and very dried. Sometimes that's natural. They're used to the ebbing and flowing of rainfall in various parts of Florida, and sometimes it's just too dry, and that can be detrimental. The minimum flows and levels are a portion of those evaluations where we're looking just at how much water can be taken out of the environment and not cause significant harm. So these are numbers that are specific to groundwater or surface water use. Very complicated science, pretty difficult to get those numbers right. We're revisiting them all the time as we get more and more information. And it's also difficult for people to understand that a minimum flow or level doesn't drought-proof a system. It's specific to how much water the population and the various human uses can use safely without harming those ecosystems. So we do have water supply challenges in Florida, and it's difficult to message that, as I mentioned, because we got water all around us, which is one of the reasons people are coming to Florida each and every day. What we call the demand is how much water all of those people, whether it's in a business or in our homes or in agriculture, what is that demand? And what's the sustainable amount of water that can be used and from what sources? So I already mentioned that the minimum flows and levels, that's a constraint that certainly plays into the flows of our springs, the levels in our lakes. Saltwater intrusion, if you remove too much of the fresh water from groundwater, salty water can come in along the coast or well up from deep beneath our feet, and other natural system related constraints. They all, it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. The water supply challenges are absolutely linked to the environmental constraints. So, I mean, we got people coming here every day. How do we ensure our water security? And I would kind of put this in three main buckets, if you will. First and foremost is water conservation. I can't tell you how often in my commute from Alachua County to Putnam County, I see people watering their grass. They've just turned on their sprinkler system. It's on automatic. It's raining. Their rain gauge is not working. We can do much better. Remember that groundwater in the upper Floridan is some of the best water available. It's readily available and it's typically very fresh. Maybe using less on non-potable needs like watering grass would be a good thing. All the different ways, indoors, outdoors, you know, in industry, that we can conserve water is better. The second line of defense is diversifying the sources. It's very easy to go to groundwater. It's readily available, but it's a finite resource. So going to groundwater that is not as potable, not as fresh, it might be brackish, which is kind of in between freshwater and seawater. That would have to be treated, so it would be more expensive to use. You couldn't put that water on a crop because they can't take brackish water. Seawater can be made potable. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and effort to do that, but it's possible. Surface water, so do you have a river that surface waters can be withdrawn from? In some other states, surface water is the name of the game. They don't use a lot of groundwater like we do comparatively. And reclaimed water, so this is water that was wastewater, was in need of cleaning and has been cleaned up and now put into purple pipes and sometimes used for irrigation and other purposes. Stormwater is another. I mean, it's raining in Palatka today. We got stormwater everywhere. That's the rainfall that's hit the ground, hasn't seeped into the ground yet, but is running off so that we don't flood otherwise, and is readily available at certain times of the year. And when it's The dry season, not so available. It's more dispersed on the landscape, a little bit more challenging, but there can be a lot of it. So thirdly, I'm very much a fan of aquifer recharge. That's already built storage beneath our feet. If we have clean water from some of these other sources that can be recharged safely into the aquifer, and there's lots of ways to do it, there's a few examples there, then we're taking advantage of the storage beneath our feet. Reservoirs, and there's a picture right there, reservoirs are another way of storing water when water is plentiful, and storing it for dry periods. But you have to build those. The aquifer is already built for us. So looking again at some of these water supply options and focusing in on reclaimed water. Remember, if we're using the water through our utilities, we're also producing wastewater that is going back to a utility to be cleaned up. And once it's clean, it can be reused, and the level of treatment tells you what it can be used for. I want to make sure that you all are aware that Florida is #1 in water reuse in the country. We beneficially reuse about 50% of the wastewater statewide, which is outstanding, but that tells you that 50% is not beneficially reused. So we have an opportunity for more wastewater being converted and used in a beneficial way. This graphic tells you that here, green is not the good one, right? Purple, for purple pipes, that means beneficial reuse, and green is actually the disposal option. So you can see in Central Florida, in our district, beneficial reuse, reclaimed, is really being done at an outstanding pace. There's a lot of outstanding and exciting pilot projects going on around the state with the experimenting with potable reuse. Now, potable reuse is probably exactly what you're wondering about. What does that mean? That means wastewater that is treated to a very high standard where it can be put into the environment safely, or directly blended in the drinking water systems, and it meets all the drinking water standards and can be reused in that way. You can see the places around the state that are already getting pilot projects. So this is not in the drinking water system yet. It's in the stages where the utilities are looking at systems that might work for them and how they might be able to use that beneficial source without just letting it go out to tide. So not disposing of it, but actually reusing it. And 3 projects, Daytona Beach, Altamont Springs, and JEA up in Jacksonville, are pilot projects that have been done or are being done in our district. The one in Altamont Springs was an international award winner for innovation. Now, those of you who know me know I can't resist talking about a few projects, and today is no exception. These projects, just gonna hit the highlights, but all of them have a water supply component. The first one is the M1 canal that feeds into Cranes Creek, which empties into the Indian River Lagoon. In our district, we have several very large, old cross-cut canals that were built back in the day. I think the M1 canal has been around for 100 years. That water, it was originally, the canals were built to forestall flooding of the landscape, but that water goes untreated directly to the Indian River Lagoon. That's not a good idea. And that watershed that you can see there, that kind of tannish color, is the over 5,000 acres that, but for the M1 canal, is acres that should be draining through the wetlands and into the St. Johns River. So this is one of those projects that's a great twofer, right? It reduces nutrient loading and sediment loading to the Indian River Lagoon, outstanding benefit, and provides about 7 million gallons a day when it's built and operational and cleaned up back to the St. Johns River where it belongs. So then it becomes part of the natural environment, but part of the water supply. Great project. We are near the end of design and hope to be in construction before the end of the year. We have great partners on this, including Brevard County and DEP. Another fabulous water resource development project. So this is a district-led project also called Black Creek Water Resource Development Project. It is taking high flows from the South Fork of Black Creek through a pipeline, through Camp Blanding, and then recharging in that area just above Lake Brooklyn. And this will help fill those lakes. It will be great for those ecosystems. It will recharge the aquifer probably up to about 7 million gallons a day on average, somewhere between 4 and 5. Again, great partners, and we're looking forward to getting to construction on this project. Last but not least is the Ocala Wetland Groundwater Recharge Park. It's got a lot of words in that title, but what it basically means, it's another one of these outstanding projects that helps Silver Springs in terms of flow, because it's a recharge park, and it cleans the water by putting the water that is coming from the recharge facility, from the wastewater facilities, and polishing it through the wetlands. And it's a passive park. Again, great funding partners, fantastic project for Silver Springs, for the citizens in Marion County and Ocala, and for the aquifer. Great project. These are usually popular because people like these parks. They're great places to visit. Last but not least is just this reminder that when you can conserve, do so, especially if you're putting potable water on the on lawns. Save that for agriculture and for our potable needs. And I'm happy that you invited me today.
Thank you so much for that great and informative presentation. We do have a few questions that are coming in, and a reminder for those of you who are on, please include or add those questions in the question box. The first question is that in recent years, there's been a lot of concern over Florida's growing population, as you even mentioned, and consumption of water. How do you think it will impact Florida, and what solutions do you propose, and what solutions is the district currently implementing?
So you're right. Between 2018 and 2019, our district gained about 300,000 people. And 300,000 people use water in various ways. That's that demand that I mentioned. The water supply planning process is one tool. It's important to look at diversifying the sources of water that we use. It's important to not waste water, so water conservation, and it's important to store water when it's abundant. It's the responsibility of the water management districts to execute that planning, and the permitting of the consumptive use of water is part of that also. There's a big push right now to really begin diversifying away from continued depletion of our groundwater sources to our alternative supplies.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, it is all about that balance of having a variety of sources and not just one. One of the questions talks about some of the groundwater modeling and how the district utilizes those groundwater models, and what type of uncertainty there is available and how we analyze it. So some of those groundwater model questions on there.
So one thing I hadn't mentioned earlier was we have an entire groundwater and surface water monitoring system from the Georgia state line all the way down to Vero at the end of the district. Literally hundreds of monitoring wells and surface water spots where we are collecting data, sometimes real time, more frequently or more often at regular intervals. Those data then are used to take a groundwater model is a mathematical construct, right? It is approximating what's going on in nature. It's not actual, it's not actually, it's an approximation. So there are uncertainties and we need to recognize that, and we do. That's why in the way that things are permitted and the way that the models are used, we're conservative in the way that we're using them. And the models get refreshed with new extended monitoring data from time to time so that they're more and more reliable as we go forward. That's why some of the things like MFLs, the minimum flows and levels, or permits and various things change over time because the models get better, they get more reliable, and the amount of monitoring data that we have that supports the assumptions of those models is richer.
Absolutely. It is all about the data when you're trying to create models.
We're science-based.
Exactly, exactly. And we have a plethora of that data that's constantly coming in. The next question is one that I got a lot of times when I was going out in public, and it is one regarding bottled water, something that I feel like people see as an opportunity to talk about bottled water, but it is a question of what about the water that we allow commercial water bottling companies to draw from the aquifer? How does that relate to the water use in our district?
So it's a controversial topic, right? And there was a lot of policy discussion going on around bottled water and whether that's something that should be happening or shouldn't be happening. Laying that aside, I will just tell you that in our district, we have 6 permits for bottling of water. Some of them are not being used at the current time. The amount of water that's permitted, if you remember in my first slide, I said we use almost 1 billion gallons of water a day. The permitted amount of bottled water that's allowable in our district is about 2.5 million gallons a day. So that's about 1/5 of 1% in total of all of that water. And I think last year the use by the bottlers was about half the permitted amount. That doesn't mean it's not an important part of the calculus, but it's not a massive amount of water compared to the whole. But it is part of a bigger conversation now, and I think we should welcome that conversation. It's Florida's water.
Absolutely. And I would be interested if we could create some sort of calculation of capturing the bottled water in comparison to the overwatering that happens, as you talked about, the watering in the rain and those sort of things. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's so important we have this campaign reminding folks to water less and take control of their irrigation. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I really appreciate it. It gave us a great overview and a great start to the core missions of our district for June as we're talking about those. And we are at time, and so we will answer any of those questions that we did not get to by directly answering those questions. And thank you so much.
Thank you.